What if the power went out tonight and everything sitting in your pantry became completely useless? Most people hear emergency preparedness and picture giant bins of rice, walls of canned goods, and water jugs stacked to the ceiling. They feel ready, confident even. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Having food means nothing if you can't cook it. And having calories means nothing if your body quietly falls apart from the inside because you missed 12 nutrients nobody ever told you to stock. Today, we're going over 12 survival foods that most people completely overlook, not because they're trendy or impressive to show off, but because when things actually go wrong, these are the items that keep you fed, functional, and mentally stable for months, even years. Stay until the end because the last few items on this list are the ones that could make the single biggest difference, and almost no one talks about that. Welcome to Food Decider. If you want to think smarter about what you eat and how you prepare for whatever comes next, hit that like button and subscribe. Let's get into it. Here's something almost nobody considers when they start building a survival pantry. They go straight for the food. Pasta, rice, canned beans, maybe some protein bars. And on the surface, that makes complete sense. You need to eat. But think about this for a moment. What happens when the power goes out, the gas shuts off, and you're sitting in your kitchen surrounded by all that food with absolutely no way to heat any of it? Cold rice, cold beans, bread that gets stale by day 2. That's not a survival strategy, that's just a pantry. This is why charcoal might be the single most important item you can store, and it's almost never on anyone's list. Not because it's food, it isn't, but because it solves the problem that makes food useless. A bag of charcoal, kept dry, can last 5 to 10 years or more without degrading. Light it, and suddenly you can boil water, cook dried grains, heat canned goods, and even warm a small space. One bag alone can give you dozens of hours of cooking ability. There's a story that captures this perfectly. During a power outage in Houston, a man had stocked his pantry well. He had food, plenty of it, but no way to cook anything. Cold bread became his diet for days, while a neighbor who had borrowed a bag of charcoal was sitting outside with a boiling pot of water, making real meals, keeping morale alive. The difference between those two situations wasn't the amount of food, it was fire. Before you add a single extra can to your storage, ask yourself an honest question. If the grid went down tonight, could you create heat completely on your own? Now, once you've solved heat, most people move straight to protein and calories. And those matter, absolutely. But here's where the second major blind spot shows up: micronutrients, specifically iodine. Iodine is one of those nutrients that disappears quietly from your diet without you ever noticing until the damage is already done. Your thyroid depends on it to regulate metabolism, body temperature, and energy. Without enough iodine, people experience fatigue that feels bone deep, unexpected weight gain, a persistent sensitivity to cold, and a mental fogginess that makes clear thinking feel like wading through mud. Most people experiencing this don't connect it to nutrition. They just feel like something is wrong and can't figure out what. The switch to sea salt, which has become popular in recent years, is actually part of the problem. Sea salt tastes more natural and sounds healthier, but it contains little to no iodine. In a normal diet, you'd likely compensate through seafood and dairy. In a survival scenario, those are the first foods to disappear. Iodized salt, on the other hand, is cheap, shelf-stable for years, and solves the problem entirely. A sealed container costs almost nothing. It doesn't make for impressive storage photos, but it quietly protects one of your most important hormonal systems. The third item in this foundational layer is one people often dismiss as a luxury: dried mushrooms. And that's a mistake. Let's be honest about what survival eating looks like after the first 2 weeks. The exciting, varied meals are gone. You're looking at rice, beans, maybe some canned goods repeated over and over. That kind of monotony does something to people that goes beyond boredom. It chips away at motivation, at the sense that things are manageable. Morale collapses faster than hunger in most long-term crisis situations. Dried mushrooms address this in a way that's genuinely remarkable for how compact and inexpensive they are. 1 pound of dried mushrooms, once rehydrated, expands to roughly 7 or 8 pounds of volume. They bring deep, savory umami flavor to any dish, the kind of flavor that makes a bowl of plain rice taste like an actual meal. Beyond flavor, they carry real nutritional weight. Vitamin D, which most people become deficient in during extended indoor or low sunlight periods, and selenium, an antioxidant mineral that supports immune function. There's an account of a woman who kept her family fed on rice and beans for several difficult months after her husband lost his income. What kept meals from becoming a source of despair was a simple bag of dried mushrooms she'd bought at a local Asian market. The soaking liquid alone became a flavorful. The rehydrated mushrooms added texture and satisfaction. Something as small as that made the difference between meals that felt like punishment and meals that still felt like care. Surviving requires calories, but enduring requires spirit, and dried mushrooms are one of the cheapest, longest-lasting ways to preserve it. With the foundations in place, the ability to create heat, protect your thyroid, and maintain morale, the next layer of preparedness is about building genuinely complete nutrition from sources that are durable, cheap, and almost always overlooked by everyone around you. Start with sardines. In almost every supply disruption or store rush, the shelves that empty first are tuna, chicken, beef, and salmon. The sardine aisle? Almost always untouched, and that works entirely in your favor. Sardines are one of the most nutritionally complete foods available in a can. A single serving delivers around 20 grams of protein, a substantial dose of omega-3 fatty acids for brain and cardiovascular health, vitamin D, and calcium from the soft, edible bones. They also contain iodine, which circles back to everything we covered earlier. They require no cooking, no refrigeration, no preparation beyond opening the can. The shelf life is long, and because they're packed in sealed metal, they maintain their nutritional value reliably over time. The real strategic advantage, though, is that most people simply don't like them. That sounds like a drawback, but consider what it means during a supply crisis. The foods everyone wants disappear. The foods most people ignore stay put. Sardines sit quietly on shelves and in pantries, available and affordable while everyone else is competing for the same 5 popular items. The question worth sitting with is this: would you rather chase the familiar foods and find them gone, or would you rather rely on the things others overlook? From something that's ready immediately to something built for the very long game, whole wheat berries. Most survival food planning is built around timelines of weeks, maybe a few months. Whole wheat berries force you to think in decades. Sealed properly in airtight containers with oxygen absorbers and stored in a cool, dry space, wheat berries can remain viable and nutritious for up to 30 years. That's not a typo. 30 years. The reason comes down to structure. When wheat is milled into flour, the oils in the bran are exposed to air and begin oxidizing almost immediately. Flour goes stale in months, even when stored carefully, but the whole berry, with its hard outer shell intact, protects those oils from exposure. The nutritional content stays locked inside until the moment you grind it. What makes wheat berries even more valuable is their versatility. They can be ground into fresh flour for bread, they can be sprouted for fresh greens, which becomes extraordinarily important when access to vegetables is limited. In extreme situations, they can even be replanted. This is raw material, not just food, but the foundation of food security across a timeline that most people never even think about. It changes something in the way you approach preparation. Most people plan for inconvenience. Wheat berries are for people planning for genuine, extended disruption. Now, 2 more items that work best when understood together: dried chickpeas and animal fat. Chickpeas share some of wheat berries' long-term durability. Dried and sealed correctly, they can last 20 to 30 years without freezing or constant rotation. But what makes them especially valuable day to day is their flexibility. Chickpeas can be cooked whole and served with grains. They can be ground into flour and used for flatbreads and pancakes. They can be roasted and eaten as a crunchy snack. They blend into soups and stews with an almost neutral base that takes on the flavor of whatever surrounds them. One family, doing a 30 to 45-day pantry challenge using only what they had stored, found that their bag of chickpeas became the pivot point of almost every meal, not because of what chickpeas are on their own, but because of how many things they could become. Surviving isn't measured only in how many calories you have. It's measured in how many different meals you can build, because variety is what keeps people going psychologically when everything else is stripped away. Animal fat, specifically rendered lard or duck fat, addresses a completely different nutritional need. Fat is the most calorie-dense macronutrient available, delivering over 120 calories per tablespoon. During periods of physical labor, sleep disruption, and sustained stress, all common in crisis scenarios, carbohydrates burn through quickly. Fat provides the slow-burning, dense energy that keeps you functional when your body is working harder than usual. Rendered and stored in a sealed container, lard or duck fat lasts 1 to 3 years without refrigeration. It doesn't function as a standalone food, but as an amplifier. A spoonful added to rice and beans nearly doubles the caloric density of that meal. It enriches vegetables, adds depth to soups, and makes hard physical days sustainable. Fat was feared for decades in mainstream nutrition culture. In a survival context, that fear becomes a liability. Nutrition keeps you alive.
But anyone who has ever been through a prolonged crisis, whether personal or communal, will tell you that the psychological dimension is just as dangerous as the physical one. The moment meals feel meaningless, the moment every day blurs into the same tasteless routine, something essential begins to erode. That's where the next group of items becomes critical. Vinegar first. White vinegar, apple cider vinegar, rice vinegar, each serves a slightly different purpose, but together they address one of the most underestimated survival challenges: how to keep food varied, safe, and interesting when refrigeration is gone and fresh produce is scarce. Pickling is one of the oldest food preservation methods in human history, and for good reason. Vegetables submerged in vinegar become shelf-stable without any refrigeration. Cabbage, carrots, onions, cucumbers, foods that would spoil within days under normal circumstances, can last weeks or months once pickled. Beyond preservation, vinegar adds brightness and acidity to meals that would otherwise taste heavy and flat. It lifts flavor in a way that salt alone cannot. White vinegar also doubles as a surface disinfectant, adding another layer of practical value in situations where cleaning supplies are limited. Vinegar never spoils. It doesn't need rotating. It just sits there, ready, waiting to make meals worth eating and food worth keeping. When blandness starts threatening your motivation, vinegar rescues it quietly. Cream of tartar is far less glamorous, but addresses a very specific problem that most people don't anticipate until it's already upon them. What happens when your yeast runs out? Bread, or any baked good, has a way of feeling like civilization. The act of mixing dough, waiting for it to rise, pulling something warm from a heat source, these small rituals carry enormous psychological weight. They signal normalcy. They create a brief return to routine in the middle of instability. When yeast disappears and that ritual collapses, something intangible but important goes with it. Cream of tartar combined with baking soda functions as a baking powder substitute. It provides leavening without yeast, which means soft flatbreads, biscuits, and pancakes remain possible even in a fully stripped-down pantry. Stored dry and sealed, it lasts for years. It's inexpensive and takes up almost no space. Sometimes the ability to bake something warm outweighs its calorie count entirely. Now into the internal dimension, the part of preparedness that's invisible but arguably the most consequential. Nutritional yeast is frequently confused with baking yeast and as a result largely ignored by people building survival stores. That's a significant missed opportunity. The value of nutritional yeast lies entirely in its B vitamin profile. B vitamins are the foundation of cellular energy metabolism. They're the mechanism by which your body converts food into usable fuel. They govern the function of your nervous system, support red blood cell production, and maintain mental clarity and mood stability. When meat and dairy become scarce or disappear entirely, B vitamin deficiencies develop quietly and can manifest as exhaustion that sleep doesn't fix, irritability, difficulty concentrating, and a creeping sense of hopelessness that's easy to mistake for psychological weakness rather than a nutritional gap. Nutritional yeast contains the full B vitamin spectrum, including B12 and many fortified varieties, the vitamin most at risk in a diet without animal products. It lasts 2 to 3 years without refrigeration, takes up minimal space, and has a mild, slightly cheesy flavor that makes repetitive food more palatable. A small spoonful stirred into rice or soup can make a measurable difference in how clearly you think and how steadily you function on a difficult day. Miso Paste works in a completely different but equally vital way. Where nutritional yeast supports cellular energy, Miso Paste supports what happens when your diet changes abruptly, which it will in any genuine survival scenario. The digestive system is profoundly sensitive to dietary shifts. A sudden change in the types of food being consumed, especially towards starches and preserved goods and away from fresh, varied whole foods, disrupts the gut microbiome significantly. That disruption shows up as bloating, cramping, irregular digestion, and reduced nutrient absorption. But it also creates a stress response that compounds whatever psychological pressure the situation is already generating. The gut-brain connection is well documented. An unstable gut produces an unstable mind. Miso Paste is a fermented blend of soybeans and salt, loaded with probiotics and bioactive compounds that stabilize gut function during exactly these kinds of transitions. A single small container provides dozens of servings, each one transforming a cup of hot water into warming, nourishing soup. Refrigerated, miso lasts for years. Even without refrigeration, it holds well for many months. Internal balance is the invisible advantage in survival preparation. If your gut is stable, your body absorbs nutrients efficiently, your stress response remains manageable, and your mind retains clarity. None of that shows up on a pantry shelf inventory, but all of it shapes whether you function well or begin to.
The final item brings everything back to the physical and to a threat that most people don't see coming until it has already slowed them down. Unflavored gelatin. Consider what survival situations actually require from your body. Carrying water, moving supplies, staying on your feet for long hours. Physical labor that most people have not performed routinely in years. The first system to fail under that kind of demand is rarely cardiovascular. It's joints, knees, hips, wrists, shoulders, the connective tissue holding the whole structure together. Cartilage, ligaments, and tendons don't receive the same dietary attention as muscle. Standard protein from meat sources supports muscle recovery effectively, but it doesn't specifically nourish connective tissue the way collagen-based protein does. And in a survival diet stripped of variety, that gap widens quickly. There's an account of a 63-year-old man who discovered during a prolonged power outage that his single greatest obstacle wasn't food, wasn't water, wasn't safety. It was his knees. Carrying water became agonizing within days. Moving supplies across his property felt impossible. The calorie count in his pantry was irrelevant. His mobility had failed him first. Unflavored gelatin provides roughly 6 grams of collagen per serving. Dissolved in warm liquid, it's tasteless and unnoticeable. Taken consistently over weeks and months, it supports cartilage repair, maintains joint flexibility, and reduces the inflammation that accumulates under sustained physical demand. A survival plan built entirely around calorie storage is only as strong as the body expected to execute it. Joint health is not optional. Gelatin is not glamorous, but the 63-year-old who couldn't carry his own water supply would tell you it matters more than almost anything else on the shelf. That's Food Decider. If this gave you something to think about, leave a like. It genuinely helps the channel reach people who need this information. Subscribe so you're here for what's coming next, and if you want to keep going, the next video is right there.